I was talking about the reference with respect to inherent powers under the Indian legal history. We all know and we have heard, although we don't have unfortunately sufficient material for that in the form of literature, books, etc. We have for centuries Gram Panchayats adjudicating the disputes of the population within their jurisdiction. Now the question is, what was the law? Was there any statute? Was there any enactment by which, on the basis of which, the Gram Panchayats were used to adjudicate? Answer is no. Was there any police force which was available to them for the purposes of its implementation of its orders? No. The only force that that was available with the Gram Panchayat was the recognition of the people's support to the system was the force of the community itself, was the recognition of that kind of adjudication by the Gram Panchayat. But Gram Panchayats therefore also had a kind of inherent powers in them to decide what way to decide, on the basis of what to decide. So this is how the background of the inherent powers of the courts is conceptually. I must now make a reference to the beginning of the statutory provisions in the Indian statutes. For that, we must go back to the 1802, when it is said that sometime in 1802, the control of the Great Britain over India was almost complete. And therefore, from 1802 onwards, the law of the British Parliament started actually being applied to the Indian territories. Maybe at that time, entire India may not be covered by those laws. And then came in 1823, the creation of 3 Supreme Courts. At that time in 1823, it was called the Supreme Court of Bombay, Supreme Court of Calcutta, and Supreme Court of Madras. And then in 1861 came the latest Patent Act, by which 3 chartered high courts came to be constituted: the Bombay High Court, Calcutta High Court, and Madras High Court. Since the origin of all our courts' legal system is on the basis of the law made by the Parliament, all those principles of law which governed the English system were inherited by us very naturally, as a in its very natural course. But even then, we had a Code of Criminal Procedure of 1898. In that, there was no provision to similar to Section 482. Question arose whether the High Court, under that Code of Criminal Procedure of 1898, had the inherent power or not. And there, the Privy Council took a view that since it is a High Court, a superior court, a court of record, it is having inherent power. So even in the absence of a provision similar to the one in 482 of the present Code of Criminal Procedure, the Privy Council recognized that the High Court did have the inherent power. As a result of that, these 2 provisions came into being. One was in 1908, the Civil Procedure Court was enacted, in which Section 151 is found, which deals with the inherent powers. And the second is, but before that, yes, and second is the 1898 Code of Criminal Procedure came to be amended, and Section 561A was introduced into the Code of Criminal Procedure of 1898, by which the provision similar to the one under Section 488 came to be introduced. This is historical background of these 2 provisions on our statute book. Now, if we see the language of Section 482 or Section 151, either of them, there is one similarity in the language of these 2 sections. Please note, if you see the language, and for the benefit of the participants, I will read just one of the 2 provisions, maybe Section 151. Nothing in this code shall be deemed to limit or affect the inherent powers of the High Court, to make such orders, etc. So this code, the Code of Civil Procedure, does not limit or restrict the powers which the court already has. And similar is the language, nothing in this code, that is Code of Criminal Procedure, now 1973, limits or restricts. The fundamental principle which is derived, instead of principle, I will say that the position in law, which is derived from the language used by section 151 and section 482 is that these provisions do not confer any power on the High Court or the court. Section 151 does not confer any power on the court, it only recognizes that it has the inherent power. Similar is the position with section 482. It does not confer any new power on the court, it only recognizes that the High Court has inherent power. And we have seen what is the width of, what is the scope of inherent power. So both these provisions in their language are very clear that they are not conferring any power, they are just recognize the courts to have the inherent power. Now, there is one interesting, and when I suggested this subject, I had initially the thinking in my mind that basically it will be a comparative analysis of the power of the court under section 151 and the power of the High Court under section 482. But thereafter I decided to expand this subject, but only in one paragraph, Supreme Court has brought out three important distinguishing features between the two provisions. Supreme Court in that judgment, in fact, it is the judgment of, I will tell the name of the parties, Surya Baksha Singh versus State of UP. In one paragraph has just narrated what are the distinctions between the two provisions. I will just read out that paragraph. It is at once obvious that whereas section 482 is available only to the High Courts, please mark it. Section 482 speaks of inherent powers of the High Court. So whereas section 482 CRPC is available only to the High Courts, section 151 can be resorted to at any stage of civil judicial proceedings in any of the hierarchical tiers. So even the lowest of the civil court, that is Civil Judge Junior Division, the Court of Civil Judge Junior Division is recognized to have the inherent powers. The first distinguishing feature. Secondly, the use of the word otherwise. If you compare I'm not going to do that because we are all lawyers. If you compare the language of section 151 and section 482, the term otherwise is inserted in 482, which is absent in 151. So what is the effect of that? This is brought out by the court in this. Secondly, the use of the word otherwise in section 482 has the avowed effect of boundlessly broadening the boundaries of the inherent powers of the High Court in exercise of its criminal jurisdiction. So because of that word otherwise used in section 482, the avowed effect that it has on the much widening of the power of the inherent powers of the High Court. And the third difference which is brought out, again on the basis of a language of section 482. Thirdly, section 482 can be employed to ensure obedience of any order passed by the court because of the phrase to give effect to any order of this order under this code. So 482 uses two different languages. One is use of the word otherwise, and second is to give effect to any order passed under this code. The effect is that if any order passed by the court, High Court or lower court under the Code of Criminal Procedure is not implemented, not complied with, the court can punish the person responsible for that for contempt of the court. This is something which High Court inheres under section 482. So this is the classic way in which the Supreme Court in that paragraph, one paragraph in that Surya Baksha Singh case has brought out the difference between the scheme of 481 or the consequences of 151 and 482. Now this is where we stand as far as the comparison between 482 and 151 is concerned. But the one question which arose to my mind and which I must share my doubt which I had when I started thinking on this subject. Why is it that Criminal Procedure Code recognizes the inherent powers only in the High Court, whereas Civil Procedure Code recognizes the inherent power in the lowest of the court also. Every civil court, the Court of Civil Judge Junior Division, Senior Division, District Court, High Court naturally, every court in the hierarchy of courts under the under the Code of Civil Procedure is recognized to have the inherent power. The question is why? Why so that CPC recognizes that power in ordinary court, the lowest possible court, and CRPC only in the High Court? In my understanding, I think there are two reasons for that. First is that the Code of Criminal Procedure and criminal law, criminal jurisprudence generally, we know that it is practically a kind of mathematical or arithmetical equation. If so and so offense, this is the punishment. So and so, if murder, this is, of course, the law says that this is the highest punishment. For example, for murder, life imprisonment or death. So it can be death or it can be life imprisonment. Theft, so and so punishment. Robbery, so and so punishment. Breach of trust, so and so punishment. And therefore, there is no scope for any kind of discretion to the court in the sense in which civil courts have traditionally enjoyed. And for that, again, we must make a reference to the historical background in England. You know that, and most of us have studied law of torts, law of contract. Law of torts, law of contract is developed by the English courts, common law courts, not on the basis of a statutory provision. When a dispute that is some 700 years, 600 years before, when a dispute came before, when two disputing parties came before the court, they understood the dispute and adjudicated it by evolving some legal principle. And that is how those legal maxims that we studied in law of torts, law of contract came into actually being because of the evolution of law by the courts. When we had the Contract of Act of 1872, we may not be aware, but most of the provisions that our Contract Act of 1872 contains, it is actually the codification of those principles evolved by the common law courts for centuries there. So without a statutory provision, disputes came to be decided by the common law courts. It is on the basis of some three principles, which I will come to later. And therefore, they needed to have some inherent power. And that is how the courts started to have this, all civil courts needed to have that kind of leeway, that kind of wide discretion. For example, molding of relief. For example, the Contract Act of 1872. Today, even in 2020, same provisions are governing, but situation, the commercial complications have intensified. But those principles, those provisions are to be applied. For that, you need to have the court, the civil court, the sufficiently wide power, and therefore, under CPC, the lowest of the court, civil court, also is recognized to have the inherent powers, but not so with the criminal courts, because I have explained that. This is how the inherent powers of the courts under CPC and CRPC actually arose. Now there are 3-4 principles, broad principles, which I need to highlight, and they are the guiding principles, salient features for use of, for invocation of either section 151 or section 482. What are those salient features? For example, first, neither of these provisions, neither 151 nor 482, they don't confer any new jurisdiction on the court. See, this is not conferment of inherent powers I'm speaking of. If they have a jurisdiction to decide particular matter, that is the jurisdiction within which they have to exercise the inherent powers. They can't assume some jurisdiction which is not otherwise vested in the court. So 151 cannot be used for the purposes of exercising a jurisdiction which is not vested in the court, otherwise not vested in the court. Secondly, this is to be used for preventing the abuse of the process of the court or process of law. Again, the language itself says that. But the next, to secure the ends of justice. But how do you secure the ends of justice? And this is where there are two important, I think, principles which are evolved by the courts for how to achieve that securing the ends of justice. One is, the whole idea behind 151 is to do right and to undo wrong. So something which needs to be done to do right, and something has gone wrong to undo wrong. The power under 151 is to be used to do right and to undo wrong. This is one thing. But how to use that power, how to exercise that power? There are three triplets, I will say, which are guiding features, which prescribe a guiding principle for the courts, and those are justice. All these inherent powers are to be exercised, keeping in view justice, equity, and good conscience. Everywhere, if you see the judgments under 151, you will see that the inherent power has to be used for doing right, undoing wrong, and to be guided by principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. Now, I will give a few examples where the courts have actually the manner in which the inherent power is exercised by the civil court. I will just give instances. For example, before going to instances, let me point out a few do's and don'ts about the exercise of 151. One is that if a particular situation is covered by a specific provision of the Code of Civil Procedure, then that provision will apply and you can't invoke 151. So specific provision applies, 151 should not be available. Second, no order should be passed contrary to the specific provision of a statute or specific provision of a code. So you can't pass an order under 151 in violation of a specific provision of law. Third, since it is an extraordinary, please remember, what the inherent jurisdiction is extraordinary kind of power, and therefore it is to be used sparingly, carefully, and with caution. Then specific last thing that I can say about is that 151 can be invoked, need not be on application of a party. It can be exercised also suo motu by the court. This is some of the do's and don'ts for exercise of 151 power. And I was talking about some of the examples, the manner in which courts have invoked 151 in a particular case, either to prevent the abuse of the process of law or to achieve the ends of justice. I will give those examples. For example, there are two suits. Court can direct both suits to be tried together, joint trial of the suits. Otherwise, CPC does not have any provision. 151 can be invoked. Then in a proper case, court can mold a relief. See, you can't be technical. If party has made a prayer which is not sufficient for doing justice, 151 can be invoked and relief can be molded. So for molding of relief, 151 can be invoked. Then the court can also summon a witness to come and depose before the court. So see, there was originally a provision under Order 18, Rule 2, Clause 4, but that was deleted, by which court had that power. But the judgment say that even after deletion of that Order 18, Rule 2, 4, the 151 can always be used for such purposes. Then restrictions on publicity of the proceedings. In appropriate case, the court can direct that the proceedings of the court may not be published in the media. This something can be done under 151. Then if somebody has gained some undue advantage with the help of the suppression of fact, for example, court can direct restoration of that benefit to whoever the party from whom he got that. Something CPC doesn't provide, but 151 enables the court to do that. Court sometimes it happens that civil court and criminal, civil suit and criminal proceedings go on simultaneously. Issues are overlapping, and there is a possibility at the that the party may have to, if he has to, he has to file a written statement, he may have to disclose his defense in the criminal proceedings, for which trial is yet to begin. In appropriate case, not in all cases, there are cases where such relief is refused. In appropriate case, the court can stay the proceedings in the civil court so that the party, the accused, doesn't have to disclose his defense. Then in matrimonial cases, for example, if the party has not paid the maintenance which is directed by the interim order, the court can always stay the proceedings and say that unless the maintenance under the interim order is paid, the proceedings will not go on. The court can correct its own mistakes which are apparent, and court can also correct the mistakes of its predecessor. For example, you know that the judges are transferred. Proceedings continue from one judge to the other because of the transfers, and because the proceedings keep pending for years. So if the predecessor has committed any error I'm saying, not error of law, etc., but obvious error in, for example, description of the property is wrongly given. Example, such errors can always be corrected by the subsequent judge. Sometimes the records of the courts are vanished, maybe because of fire, maybe because of flood, because of any other contingency. Directing reconstruction of the record of the court also can be done under section 151. And this is something that I personally actually experienced, I must tell you. A couple of years before, when one of the lawyers came to me, and his case was that he wanted the defendant to be directed to enter into witness box and lead evidence. Now it is well settled that the court, the party cannot be forced to enter into witness box. If it doesn't, if it chooses not to enter into witness box, adverse inference can always be drawn. But there are instances where 151 is invoked, directing the party to lead evidence or to enter into witness box and depots. So this is how 151 can be exercised, has been exercised by the courts. Now, as far as the 482, the use of 482 under CRPC is concerned, there are similarly many examples. There is one judgment of the Supreme Court, but because of paucity of time, the time that we have wasted in the initial technical glitches, since originally I had in my mind to actually read out those particular seven situations which are crystally actually laid down by the Supreme Court for exercise of 482, especially for the purpose of quashing of the criminal proceedings. That is the case of State of Haryana versus Bhajanlal, very well-known case. I don't want to read those seven situations in which the court may be justified in quashing the proceedings. Court has laid down that. But Bhajanlal's case, but as we all know that section 482 of the CRPC is invoked mainly for the purpose of quashing of the proceedings, either the complaint, private complaint which is filed, or the FIR which is lodged. So this is how the 482 commonly is used by the court, by the advocates. But there are, apart from quashing, there are other instances where the 482 has been invoked. I have given you examples of what way 151 power has been exercised by the courts under the CPC. I will give the examples of manner in which, apart from quashing, section 482 is invoked by the court. I will give just read out those instances. For example, you know that sometimes we file appeals or revisions before the Superior Court challenging the conviction and sentence. And in fact, we are aware that the sentence which is actually awarded is far less than the gravity of the offense. And in such situations, the high courts are within their powers, and there are actually instances where high courts have done that. While entertaining your appeal, High Court also issues notice for enhancement. This is something done under section 482. So for notice of enhancement of the punishment, is many a times issued by invoking section 482. Then the order directing payment of compensation to the victim. We all know that our criminal jurisprudence is not really, did not really recognize the concept of victim at all. Only recent amendment brought in the concept of victim, the term victim is defined. Then the power to challenge the orders of the court is also conferred by introducing amendment in the CRPC. But this is of recent past. Otherwise, victims did not have any role, did not have any recognition. But 482 has been invoked by the courts for directing payment of compensation to the victim of the offense. There is one classic example of how the legislative exercise by the state legislature was practically defeated by the courts. We all know that the power of the Sessions Court and High Court to grant anticipatory bail to a person who is likely to be arrested in connection with any offense. Section 438. State of UP, the legislative house of the UP deleted by state amendment section 438. So there was no provision for anticipatory bail in the state of UP for years. What is the way out? And you know that police sometimes fabricate, sometimes do not really play their role or discharge their powers in a very bona fide way. And some people are unduly, unnecessarily implicated. In such situations in state of UP, even after 438 was deleted, the people used to invoke section 482, and instead of saying that anticipatory bail or don't arrest him or release him on bail in case of arrest, the language used in 438, the High Court in UP for years invoked section 482, directing that no coercive steps be taken against the accused during the pendency of the investigation or till further orders, whatever. So even a situation where 438 was consciously deleted by the legislature, 482 was invoked by the high courts in those situations. Then there are situations where, for example, sometimes the courts do make some adverse remarks against maybe some investigating officer or maybe some lower court. What is the way out for that? The High Court has invoked section 482 in appropriate case for expunging the remarks or adverse observation made in the orders of the court against any person. I in fact remember several years before, when I was in Bombay, one of the magistrates had approached us for expungement of certain remarks made against him by the High Court. And the only way for him was making an application under section 482 for expunging those remarks. We succeeded, fortunately. Sometimes restitution of property, stolen property, or any kind of property which is subject matter of the offense also is directed under section 482. So this is the way in which the inherent powers of the High Court is used under section 482. I think since you are all lawyers, you may be able to tell many more examples, illustrations of way in which 151 or 482 can be invoked, is actually invoked by the court. But I think the most important part of exercise of power under section 482 and 151 is something which I already stated. Two most important principles. One is to do right and to undo wrong first. And secondly, the exercise of this inherent power is guided by three most fundamental values: justice, equity, and good conscience. In the end, I will just make reference to what is observed by Justice Krishna Iyer. And that is something that Krishna Iyer, judgment of 1976, I don't give citation, but I think he has the enormous ability to express in just small sentence the width of or the situation in which the inherent power can be exercised. I will read the words of Krishna Iyer in the judgment of 1976. The inherent power has its roots in necessity, and the breadth and the breadth of that inherent power is coextensive with the necessity. As intense is the need, so wide will be the power to be exercised under inherent jurisdiction. So first, the necessity is the need of the inherent power to be exercised, and the breadth of that power is dependent upon the intensity of the need. This is how Krishna here has placed it. I think nothing better way I can conclude this subject of inherent jurisdiction of the court. I know that there were some glitches in the beginning, and therefore we could not have the coherent, complete coverage of the topic in one session. But I hope that despite all problems that we had and the break that we have been able to complete the subject. And now I put it to you, to the audience or to the organizers, to carry the procedure further.
Thank you, sir. If anybody have queries, put your queries in chat box. We have 6 minutes in our hands, sir.
Yeah, somebody, it seems from the chat that people wanted to have the citations. My colleague who is sitting here, Advocate Gwen, is kind enough to forward those citations which are on the chat box. Surya Baksh Singh citation is given, then other citations also she will be able to give. Bhajan Lal is 1992.
Sir, one more question is there. Sir,
Yes.
under which provision trial criminal court have inherent?
Sorry?
Under which provision trial criminal court have inherent power?
See, to be very frank with you, the the recognition of inherent power under the CRPC is only restricted to the High Court, and I have also given you the reasons, the historical reasons, historical background for that. So the fundamental difference between the two provisions, I already told you that while 151 of CPC recognizes the inherent jurisdiction or inherent power in the lowest of the civil court, that is not the case with the courts under the CRPC. It's only the High Court. See, there may be some powers vested in the court where suo moto court can do something, but being able to do suo moto is something different from the inherent powers, and therefore inherent powers, as we know, as we discussed, are not there recognized with respect to the trial courts or the lower courts under the CRPC. My colleague Gwen has given the citations on the chat box, so whoever wanted can now make use of that.
So I will.
Hello.
See, there is one question which I am able to read from Varsha Joshi.
Yes.
Why are the courts reluctant to quash the complaints under section 482 of the CRPC, even when they have powers? I think this is a very natural question bound to arise in our mind as lawyers. But we must, I made a mention of one thing, that there is one some of the salient features, do's and don'ts. See, this is an extraordinary power. This is not to be used not only mechanically, this is not to be used repeatedly. It is to be used sparingly, carefully, and with all caution. The way accused has certain rights under the CRPC, the CRPC also intends that the offences which are committed need to be investigated, need to be tried. And therefore, the courts have laid down the parameters. Bhajanlal is one such classic example of where 7 parameters are laid down. But generally, the courts are slow, rightly so, in quashing the proceedings, unless either in the ends of justice or the in case the abuse of the process of law is being seen. And see, there is one important reason for that. We all know that the principle for quashing is that whatever the allegation contained in the private complaint or in the FIR, it is supposed to be truthful allegation. And whether the offense is made out or not, that's the only scrutiny to be done in such case. Many a times we see that quashing petitions are filed saying that no, this allegation is not correct, I have a proof. The person was not present there, he was hospitalized. This is a matter of evidence, this is a matter of trial. And therefore, we many a times see that the courts are slow in quashing the proceedings.
Pushpalanjali ma'am, please.
Yeah. Sir, we are really thankful to you being among us and share your expert view. Thank you very much, sir. From all of
Thank you.
our team, Jan Adalat.
So I say goodbye.
Yes, sir. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste.